All right, welcome to this week's live office hours for Aura. We're pumped to jump in. It's a nice rainy day out, so that's exciting. Uh, it's you get like 4 or 5 really solid bright days, and then it just becomes horrible.
Yeah,
So as we're jumping in here, and appreciate everybody jumping in with us here. Before we start jumping into questions, and go ahead and add those to the comments section, we'll start to work through those. One thing I really wanted to highlight was using data. It's funny. I see this all the time. Like Amazon sellers are drowning in data. Okay, what does that mean, and why should I care? You should care because good data helps you make good decisions, right? And a lot of times, like Amazon sellers are not data analysts by skill, right? Like I'm certainly not. And you kind of feel like you're just blindly making decisions or bets, right? It's like, well, I just decided to do this thing. Well, okay, well, based on what? What led you to making that decision? And it's important to be able to kind of build the skill level. I'm using this data that gave me this idea that I then validated. Now I'm going to go take action on it. Even if it's wrong, building that habit, I think, is far more important than sellers realize. And a good example here is like wholesale, right? When I transitioned to wholesale, one supplier could make up 80% of your revenue. That also means that if you lost that supplier, you would lose 80% of your revenue. It's a catch-22, right?
right.
And so what I realized is, okay, well, I need to be running like monthly profitability reports based on supplier. Where's my revenue coming from? And what that allows you to do is understand where your risk, right? If I'm over indexed on one particular brand, that's okay, but I need to spend way more time deepening that relationship if it's not already deep enough. Because again, I could lose that overnight, right? And so it's less about just, well, I'm just paying them money. Well, that could go away, right? Like I've said this over the last decade, like money's not enough anymore. Money used to be able to change, minds, not anymore. And so that's one thing, one aspect of that report. The other aspect of that report is what are the brands that you're working with that if you spend a little bit more time strategizing, you could do a lot better with, right? Like who's your number 5 in terms of profitability or in terms of volume? That really could be your number 2. And you're just not putting much effort into it. And so a lot of sellers will just say, well, I just need to get the next account, get the next account, get the next account. While that is true, you also need to pause and say, well, how do I go deeper into the accounts? You already have these accounts that maybe you're only 60% of what you're capable of. Imagine just getting to 80%, right? And so when people are like, oh, I need to scale, how do I add more accounts? I'm like, well, do you know based on the data that you're actually maximizing the current accounts you have? Because I mean, those are dramatically easier. That's literally just placing a larger order in a lot of cases, or sending one email, or making one phone call. And that's one very specific use case of utilizing data to make smarter decisions. But one thing I realized too is I was tracking revenue. I was like, well, that's kind of cool, but like, it feels very much like a vanity metric at a certain point. And so I started to ask myself, well, let me break down my KPIs here, right? Like, how do I measure the business? And one of those was the average net profit or average ROI. Well, so I started to track that at a high level and say, well, I don't want tons and tons of SKUs. I want the right SKUs. And so because I was capital constrained, I used this report at the SKU, at the ASIN level to say, great, as I'm adding new accounts, can I trade my lowest ROI SKU or ASIN for the next highest one? Even if it's only 4 percentage points higher, that's still trading up. And so you can grow the business in so many different ways, top line revenue, margin, all these different things. And I think you can do both. But how do you know what the right decision to make is? And so for me, it's always the data, and Amazon sellers are drowning in data. Casey, I know you see this a lot, even inside of Aura, just the sheer amount of analytics you have access to as a seller.
Yeah, I mean, all you can ever do in anything in life, let alone Amazon selling, is make the best decision with the information that you have at hand. So having data and making it actionable is extremely important. Like you said, there is so much data that's available. It's a little overwhelming to try and itemize it or figure out what data is most impactful. And I think, like you said, if you recognize that your ROI or your margin or whatever it may be is a little bit higher on one product compared to the other, I would double down on that item. A lot of my experience comes from the Shopify space, where obviously a little bit different. You're not sourcing items, but similar thing where you're trying to figure out, hey, for that big rush of the season, I need to prioritize certain items based on what's selling well, and always recommended, hey, look at what's sold the most and make sure you have enough inventory of that on hand. Bring
Yeah.
that over to the Amazon space. It's probably a little bit more categorical. Like if you notice, hey, kids' toys sold really well in Q4, then maybe double down on that, maybe slide some other items lower on your priority list. So yeah, just taking any sort of data that can make an impact and using it to your advantage is going to make a big difference. Absolutely.
Yeah. Even looking at things like seasonality, right? Going into Q4, how do you prepare for Q4? Well, if it's your first Q4, you just ride the roller coaster. There's no way you can prepare for that, in my opinion. But you'll learn, right? In the next year, you should start to develop some kind of strategy for when do I pre-buy things, whether that's OA, RA, wholesale, it doesn't matter, right? And then what trends did I notice that I can take advantage of with my experience now? Because if you saw that, okay, I really went ham, I doubled my inventory, and actually that wasn't enough. Okay, well, what do we do with that? And again, it's going to come back to looking at the data itself. And so I think a lot of sellers spend far less time just analyzing data to make better, larger, more impactful decisions than just, I need to source more. And like a lot of times it comes down straight up to like, just go buy more for sure. But as the business starts to grow, you have to start thinking about scale, right? How do you make scalable decisions? And we wrote a blog post, goaura.com/blog, talking about making the difference between like 50 unit decisions and 50,000 unit decisions. Well, a lot of that comes down to strategy. It's less about like hustle more just, are you asking the right questions, right? The right question is halfway. Like if you get what's a quote here, like if you can clearly define the problem, you're halfway to solving it, right? And a lot of times we just can't do that. We don't know what questions to ask. And I think if you can get really good at just exploring your curiosity with your data, you'll uncover things that become massive competitive advantages that other sellers are simply not doing. Like I'll just be frank, like I talked to hundreds of sellers, actually thousands at this point. And most of them don't know answers to the basic questions. Like, what's your average ROI? Like, even internally here, like if we're talking externally to somebody and they're like, hey, what's your LTV, blah, blah, blah. I know those numbers off the top of my head because I look at them every single day. But we don't just look at them. We say, well, cool. Like what goes into this? How do we have an effect on this? How do we, triple this thing with one move, one chess move versus, playing chess versus checkers as an example. And I think the sellers that I talk to that are at a very high level, like the people you look up to, they're playing chess, not checkers. Like I've sat in on a lot of these conversations. I've seen things behind the scenes, and the decisions they're making vastly different than the average seller, which is why they're not the average seller anymore, right? It's not, they're not the average seller, therefore they get to make these decisions. No, they became not the average seller because of those decisions and those questions they're asking. And so in a lot of cases, even in software, when you're first getting started, you don't have any data, right? You have to, accumulate this over time, and you have to accumulate it in a way that is useful. And then you have to make smart decisions based on that. You have to wrap your head around what even is this, right? And this is something we do a lot internally because we've just seen the impact on that. If you're making pricing changes, what have you, new features, all of it can boil down to data. And as an Amazon seller, you're immediately day one plugged into a platform that gives you access to this data. And even your third-party tools like Aura, all these other analytics-based tools, you can really move faster than you would ever anticipate. So I'd like to kind of open up with that. It's one area I think we should explore a lot more in our content too, is kind of sharing how do you go about analyzing your data, right? Like, what does that mean? There's things that we've just been doing for years that when I say, hey, just go look at the data, people are like, what does that even mean? Like, what's the how behind that? So yeah. As everybody's jumping in, we got a lot of people jumping in on the earlier side, which is awesome. Make sure you're adding your comments here. This is an open session called Office Hours, where we can dive deep into Aura as a product, features. How do you do certain things? If you're brand new and you're like, I'm kind of struggling with something, let us know in the comments so we can actually show you exactly how to overcome that. We can go more meta if we need to, right? If we're talking about data right now, we can talk about fees. We can talk about hiring and recruiting, all kinds of cool stuff. It's just a great way where we can have people jump in and just have a casual conversation and answer those deeper questions that people may have. And we've had tons and tons of people joining Aura recently. I've been seeing it on Twitter all over the place of people just being like, I finally made the switch. This is awesome. So if you're new to Aura and you're seeing some amazing results, we'd love to hear that as well. And we'd love to highlight that for everybody else who's watching.
Yeah, and like you said, especially with a lot of new people getting started to Aura, whether they're new to Aura or new to the space as a whole, just having access to that data might help you figure out what types of questions you should be asking. I think
Right.
a lot of times you don't know what you should be looking for, but that's the great thing about the universal language of numbers. It's easier to know what's high, what's low, what looks good, what doesn't. So looking at that data, and that might inform you where you might want to spend some more time to boost some numbers or drop some other ones, and just kind of fine tune your initial strategies there.
Yeah, that's the big problem, right? Knowing what questions to ask. And sometimes people can just straight up be like, here's the question bank, go answer these and you'll do amazing. But a lot of times in business, there is no question bank. There are just like caverns of unanswered questions that you have yet to discover. And you get really good at just looking at what's in front of you and just being like, what's interesting to me? And let's start there. And like that becomes the catalyst for the next thing and the next thing. And then eventually, like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. Because a lot of times, especially when you're getting started in a new industry, you don't even know the language, the terminology, right? So you're like,
right.
I was talking to somebody about this yesterday and they're like, you know, like I have all these questions, but I don't even know the language to use to ask the question correctly to find the right answer, which is like dumbfounding when you think about it, right? Like if I wanted to get into, I don't know, carpentry comes to mind for some reason. It's like, I want to do this. I don't know what that's called, or I can only say this. How do I search for that? But this kind of goes back to like the importance of getting into a community, being able to be like, hey, like kind of dumbly, here's the thing I want. What is that called? And someone's like, oh yeah, that's a joint or whatever. I don't know. I don't know anything about carpentry, but, but you know what I mean? It's like being able to kind of move fast using your network, your community. But it all starts from like those deeper questions. So
yeah.
See, John, here's a question here. Good afternoon, guys. Any way I can strategy with a negative ROI? Casey, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I can jump in there, John. So I would assume in this case, John, you're looking to liquidate some items. By default, you can't have Aura set automatic minimum prices that go into a negative threshold, so negative margin, negative ROI. So what you'll want to do is if you do go to our help docs, help base, knowledge base, sorry, struggling with words there. We do have a how-to article on how to create a liquidation strategy. So I would recommend following those steps. And then you'll just have to manually set that minimum price so that it can go into that negative area, if you will. Like I said, by default, Aura can only set down to a 0% ROI. So if you want to get lower than that, you'll have to go manually set those prices there.
Yeah. And John, the way we kind of approach this or make recommendations is you basically start your liquidation strategy with a 0% ROI, because if we can at least break even, we kind of want to. That's like phase one of a liquidation. Phase two is to go negative, because now it's like, I'm clearly not going to recoup my money. I just need some kind of capital back. Let's move forward and move fast. So yeah, we basically have you set that at 0% ROI automatically using the strategy settings. And then for each individual one, you can go in and be like, okay, well, I know that the break even is $20 as an example, because we're using a 0% ROI. Let me drop that down from $20 to $15. That's technically a negative. And so now you can have a little bit more fine control, because most of the time you don't need to do that in bulk. Now that does occur, of course, hence why you kind of start with 0. But most of the time, this is like the worst 10% of your inventory, right? If in 10% may be on the higher end as a percentage of your inventory. So we kind of recommend actually handling those a little bit more one-to-one, because they are exceptions, and there are a lot more things happening with it. And we would kind of prefer you to take a deeper look at the analytics for that one, because it might just be like, it's about to bounce back up. I see the data. Again, we're talking about data, right? I can see the trend. Actually, I don't really need to go that low. I'll hold it at 0% ROI. If I can move it faster, I will, but I kind of want to be able to like ride that wave back up because I have enough inventory, as an example. So hopefully that helps there. But yeah, help.goaura.com. That's where you're going to find a bunch of awesome support documentation. I know Casey and Finn's rolling out some new stuff this week as well. And I think we just had a few things go live into last week too. Great question. Yeah. Minimum prices, man. we were talking about this earlier as a team, because a lot of newer sellers are like, why does it matter, right? Why is it so important? Mins and maxes are incredibly important. And a lot of people question the importance of max prices specifically, because they're like, well, somebody's gonna pay me $1,000 for a $20 item. I want them to be able to. Well, nobody's going to. Like, I've been that seller. I promise you it never happens. But you want the upside, and right? And so we're trying to find a balance between how do we set it so that it's not set too low, so we lose out on upside margin, or too high, in which case, especially using something like the oscillation strategy, will actually reduce the performance, which is like kind of tough, right? Like, you can't perfectly do this. That's why with Maven, we're like, no, let's design it so that that's dynamic, because there's so many variables that come into play. And because you have to do this, if you want to set it correctly before Maven, you have to do this individually. Well, if you have 1,000, 5,000 SKUs, like, that's really tough. And unfortunately, you can't just set it one time when it goes live, be like, cool, that's it. Like, we're done here. No, it needs a change, because the market changes, right? The supply and demand curve changes. You just had 30% more, competitors jump on the listing. Well, that fundamentally just changed things. Or 30% dropped off. Now the price actually could increase a little bit because there's less downward pressure from competitors. Okay, well, so it matters. And we can strategically go up, but where do we go matters, right? If we go too high, that's a problem. If we go too low, we miss out. So Maven's designed to basically abstract all that away from you and be like, we got this. Like, it's dramatically easier to do this with code and AI than having you manually calculate this and hope you did it right. Ideally, we're trying to build a platform to where it's kind of hard to get wrong. It's like, you shouldn't have to be an expert in these things. And, listen, I've been a seller at a high level. And so, like, I've used other tools where it's all on me. And if I mess it up, they're like, that's on you. Well, why can't the product be built in such a way that it is on me, but there's a lot of, good stuff in there that kind of keeps me from messing things up myself, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for folks, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Dylan. When some people are like, hey, I have to set a max, but I'm not sure. How high should I go? I typically say, if you have, like, for example, let's say 5 to 8 competitive sellers on it, I usually say go like 10% above that highest person, so that if some people sell out, you're just kind of having bookends on your minimum price, obviously. And then a threshold that would be great, would be unlikely to happen, but still kind of gives you large space and leeway to potentially get a sale up there. What are your thoughts on general max price?
It's so hard.
Ideology, I guess.
I want to give like a simple, but our world exists in percentages, right? So the oscillation strategy was designed to handle the maximum percentage of scenarios possible that we could technically do, right? And so when you take that, I used to think we get probably close to like 80%. I think in reality is closer to 60%, seeing what Maven's able to do. Because now with Maven, we're able to handle like dramatically more percentages of your listings with you doing less. And so it comes down to, there's always going to be exceptions. And that's where it gets tough, right? It's like, generally speaking, yeah, that works. But generally in what way? Like 50%, 51%, 80%, 99%, it kind of depends. And so for me, I always come back to what's the ROI on the person's time and thought process, right? Because even if you got 100% perfection, but you had to manually do this and it took up a lot of your time, a lot of your headspace, is that worth it to scale? Like, could you scale that? Probably not, compared to, we use like an AI model that can do it 95%. Now the ROI on your time and headspace is actually worth that, in theory, right? Like, we're talking hypotheticals here. So in terms of, kind of taking what the average has been and raising that by some kind of percentage, works well, but the percentages get kind of tough because the variance in the price is so wide, right? You have items that sell for $10 and you have items that sell for $1,500. So 10%, might work at $150, but at $15, $20, it's not much, right? So I tend to actually look at dollar amounts. So what I would do is I would say, okay, I want a plus or minus, right? So that'd be like my min max as an example here. If the buy box is like $25 on average, I'm okay going up to 27, maybe 28, depends on how in demand the product is. And again, it's always going to depend. That's the hard answer here. But generally that's going to work pretty well. And on some of those types of listings, I might be able to go a little bit higher. I might have to go a little bit lower on that max. But as the buy box price itself increases, so does that gap, right? Because is it realistic for somebody to pay $100 for something that's been averaging 85? Yeah, actually it is. Now, as an exception, not the rule, right? That's not generally going to happen, but could you get a sale there? Yes, you can. And I've seen this happen. Is it realistic for a sale to occur at $50 for something that's been selling at 25 on average? Maybe, but the percentage of that being possible is far, 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 far less. So there are scenarios where, yes, that could occur. Like all your competitors dropped off. You're the only one on there. You can control it. There's so much demand. Cool. Sure. On average, probably not. Right. That's kind of how, and this is why it's so hard to manually set these, because you're doing this arithmetic, and it's not even just a math equation, right? A lot of people are like, oh, just give me a math equation to throw into Excel. Can't do it. I mean, you can, but it's not nearly as good because there's a certain level of psychology to it. And it's kind of this variance, right? It's not just, well, take this and apply this value. It's like, actually, it depends on what range it's in. That value multiplier may change, right? It may be, you multiply the buy box by 1.1 to get that 10% increase. If it's less than 50, if it's a greater than 50, maybe you could go to 1.15, right? So now we're doing 15%. So you see how it gets so much more complex. And we're only looking at price as a variable in this equation, by the way, right? We're not even looking at how's the competition changing. Was the buy box price suppressed at 45 last? Well, we should factor that in. So we can get a good system that is simple, but simple doesn't always work. We've been talking a lot lately about sellers dealing with two major problems. That's speed and complexity. Things are very complex right now. That doesn't mean they're not solvable. It's just how you solve complex things is going to push more and more and more into code and AI. Speed is its own thing. That's pure code, basically, in my opinion. Like humans are very slow. So, not necessarily that I disagree. It's just that's a good starting point. And then how do we factor things on top of it? It's kind of how I would view that. So, yeah. See, Pratham wanting to join us. Yeah. So actually, I just added this here. So we are hiring, which is exciting. So if you want to take a look, you're in Boston. That's pretty awesome. Take a look, goaura.com/careers. We'd love for you to apply. It's exciting stuff. See, John, does Aura stop repricing items if they're stranded from hitting a high pricing error? Yeah, go for it, Casey.
Yeah. So John, if you do run into a high pricing error, that listing is going to be deactivated via Seller Central. So Aura will stop repricing that item. Aura's only going to reprice items that are active in Seller Central. So when it goes into inactive status on Seller Central, it will be moved to either out of stock or inactive within Aura. And then once you reactivate it, it will automatically be reactivated in Aura and continue repricing based on your strategies. So if you do have those items being stranded, don't worry. Aura is not going to continue to mess with things behind the scenes. Once it's live and back in action, Aura will continue to deploy those price changes for you.
Yeah. And I think it's worth kind of pausing and asking, like, why would that occur? Like, in what situation? A lot of times sellers will set mins and maxes in Seller Central as well as try to set those in Aura. Those are blinded to one another. They do not communicate. It's very intentional. We really do not believe that you should be setting mins and maxes inside of Seller Central. It tends to just cause more problems than what is like. They're not useful, right? They are useful and used in repricing tools. So you should be setting them there. That's kind of your central source of truth for those specific types of values. So a lot of times when we see these things occur, high pricing error, stuff like that, it's because we're setting manually max prices as an example in Seller Central, and then Aura is doing its own thing, especially if you're using Maven where we're dynamically setting this. We set it to a price that is over the value of that max value in Seller Central, which naturally Amazon's like, you said not to do that. You did it. I shut it down. There's no great way to auto correct that in Seller Central, like make it reactivated, which is infuriating because I wish that were the case. We could just handle it for you and just completely abstract that away. For what we've seen, that's not yet the case. But yeah, for the most part, if you're not setting those in Seller Central, you're going to be okay. We're looking at things, by the way, especially if you're using Maven, things like competitive pricing offers, right? So if Amazon's like, cool, this is on target and we don't want you to be above $25, we'll factor that into the max price as best we can, right? It's always a moving target there to try and avoid a lot of those things. Because it's not always that that data is available, but when it is, it's incredibly useful. It's just not available all the time. So I forget what percentage of the SKUs we surveyed had that included, but it's a relatively low percentage in reality. So whenever it's there, makes it super easy for us because we just know what Amazon's going to do in that case, and we can avoid it. A lot of times they don't tell you, and there's like, oh, that's too high. Based on what? We're not going to tell you. Wonderful. We got to factor that in. So, but yeah, Maven will factor that in as best as it can, as well as if you're looking at things like the buy box itself was suppressed, we'll factor that into the max value calculation as well. That way, if we saw it, you don't have to deal with it. We can just kind of carry on. So we can actually auto recover suppressed buy boxes, as well as factor in what price did they say that was too high at. And what's nice is that can change too, right? If we notice that it got suppressed at $30 and we're like, all right, cool, we need to stay beneath that. But then we see a seller pull the buy box at 32 2 weeks from now. Well, now we can be like, cool, like clearly something has changed. We can go up there now. We can start testing that price point. Oh, we're good here. Okay, let's continue on. And that's why I keep saying about things that are complex. It's not just that they're complex technically or like in this moment, it's that things change over time. Every one of your competitors is in a different stage or phase of the life cycle of their inventory, meaning every seller, when you first go live, you're pretty conservative, right? You want your price up here, profitability. As time goes on, your price tends to dwindle because opportunity costs, long-term storage fees. You care less about profitability and more just get my capital back. Every one of your competitors is in a different segment of that life cycle. And so you got to factor that in, as well as what is Amazon saying is okay now, but isn't going to be okay in 2 weeks, or the inverse of that. Things just change so rapidly. And it's not like you're just getting a notification that's like, hey, by the way, in a week, we think this price is going to be too high. They're just like, it's too high now. And like, sorry, but like, you can't fix it. We just turned it off. So you can fix it that way if you'd like. So definitely fun. That's the hard part about what we do, right? It's like things change so rapidly. And so for us, it's less about how do I give you another strategy and more, how do I build a model that can basically handle all that, right? The analogy I give is like an emergency fund. It's always recommended to build a 3-6 month emergency fund from a personal finance perspective. Well, people go, well, what emergency? I don't know. Well, if I can't predict it, why should I save for it? Well, you can't tell what it will be, but you can tell that something will occur. So let's just build a buffer so that when it does, you're like, oh, cool. Like this is the one, like we're good here. It's a similar analogy in the sense of, instead of being super strict, I mean, like exactly like here's how it works. So like build it exactly to handle that. We say, no. Let's build a model that can understand how things work now, because they change so rapidly that it can self-adapt. That's the big difference. That's why I keep calling Aura a model, like Maven a model, not necessarily a strategy, because the perspective there is different, right?
Yeah, it's so fluent. It's just constantly changing. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. Totally nothing to do with business or Aura, but any strategy-based mobile games you guys like to play on your downtime? Casey, are you a gamer? We haven't actually talked about this.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big gamer. I'm a big sports gamer. So I have a console. I've been playing MLB The Show a lot recently. Baseball is my big sport. So in terms of mobile games, I would consider Fantasy Baseball mobile. That kind of tails into our data conversation earlier. I just had my draft a couple of weeks ago, so it was very deep in the data from last year and projections and all sorts of stuff. Excited for the Red Sox to be back in town. I go to games frequently, but nice. I used to be big into Clash of Clans. I used to do that. Not that that's very strategy, but I used to be big into that in like high school and college for sure. Not so much big into mobile games anymore. Like I said, Fantasy Baseball kind of scratches that itch for me, but I've played like the Star Wars Jedi Survivor games and stuff recently, but a lot of sports stuff over here.
Yeah.
Are you a big gamer? Do you do any mobile gaming or anything? Yeah.
I used to. So in middle school, I think is when I got like heavy into like non-console gaming. So like Halo, obviously. I was on a very small 3v3 like pro, like, well, we weren't pro, we were amateur trying to go pro, like game team. Like we were doing Halo 2. And so like that was kind of fun, but then I got like my first PC and started to go down that rabbit hole and got real deep on RuneScape, which is like amazing at least back then. I tried to play it recently. I was like, this is boring. And then I got sick for a week in high school. And I was like, you know what, let me just try out World of Warcraft, see what these nerds are talking about. Got hooked instantly. So I played that for a number of years for like 8 hours a day, which is like not productive. But hey, high school. And then stopped doing that. And Honestly, like I don't play any video games these days. I love the idea of it, but every time I try to, I'm just like, I'm kind of bored. You know, I'll play
Yeah.
Call of Duty on my phone because that's just honestly, it's super easy. Like
Simple enough.
just
Yeah.
jump in, like crush it and like jump out.
Yeah.
But less so on the strategy side. I do like board games quite a bit. I have a group of friends. We'll do that every now and then. There's a bar here where you can go basically just like pull one off the shelf and just go ham for hours.
Nice.
So that's kind of fun. But I find myself liking the more casual team deathmatch of just jumping in, running it, and be like, cool, I'm done in like 10 minutes and like get back to work.
Yeah.
I have a family now, so there's less time for for dedication to gaming. And with what's happening with AI right now, honestly, like a lot of my free time goes towards trying to just keep up with the advancements there, where I'm like, sounds fun, but like, I don't know. John, if you have any good recommendations, throw them in the chat here.
Yeah.
Because I'm always looking. I always love the idea of getting back into it, but I'm just like, I don't know, man.
Yeah, my family's big into Monopoly. Monopoly's always been huge in my family. My dad has 2 brothers, and when they would fight, my grandmother would ground them from Monopoly, and she would hide the Monopoly board. So Monopoly's big in my family, and then they've started to see more like cooperative board games, which is kind of cool. Me and my roommates have played, I can't remember if it's Save the Captain or their captain's dead, but it's kind of like you're in a spaceship and aliens are attacking and you got to get to different parts to fix different things. Everyone's got a different role. So yeah, there's a lot of cool board games out there now compared to like, you know, Clue and Risk.
Mousetrap.
I like Risk as well. Yeah, it's Mousetrap.
I loved Mousetrap as a child. I do want to get into like the VR gaming, especially like shooters, but like multi like team, you know, team v team, like that would be fun. I just haven't done it. Again, time, you know, it's like love the idea. But then you're like, I'm playing with other people. It's also kind of like isolating, like when the family's here, you know, like my 7-year-old's like, hey, like let's play. I'm like, like I can't see you anymore. So hard sell. This is how I know I'm getting old.
Yeah, I have an Oculus, and I really usually only use it for like golf simulator. Like they've got a bunch of famous golf courses that are like the real courses in there. So I'll be in my kitchen with my goggles on, just swinging around. But yeah, they have some like kind of like Fortnite type games that I've played. They're good, but it's tough to like not get dizzy with the vision sometimes, like looking around and running. But but yeah, I'm interested to see how that evolves in the next few years, especially with Apple just putting out whatever their VR
Vision Pro. I was about to say. I scheduled a time. I went and demoed Apple Vision Pro, and it was amazing. I'm not going to lie. It's absolutely incredible. The price point is ridiculous, but I do like the idea of like putting that on and having like multiple virtual screens. And I did this with the Quest 2 for like years and years ago, just to see what I could. Like hooked it up to my Mac, had, you know, Spotify, Slack, browser, email, all that good stuff. And it was cool. But, you know, it's not there yet in terms of being productive. Like for me, like the gaming stuff is fun, but I'm a productivity nerd. So I'm like, how do I get more done? And so for me, I'm like, how do I, you know, when do we get to a point where AI is inside of like a VR or an AR using glasses? So augmented reality kind of setup where I don't really need a screen. So like, you know, everybody can see behind you that these are our desk setups, you know, everybody gets dual monitors, all these things, but like, is there a potential world where you don't get that? You don't get a Mac, you get a keyboard and you get a Vision Pro, and it's like, set it up however the heck you want, whatever makes sense. And maybe it is more visual based, right? Like I'm having conversations with my computer, which sometimes I do. Like if I'm writing and stuff and I'm like, I just have this like chaotic idea, I need help, I'll just like speak to like ChatGPT and be like, just organize my thoughts for me, please. You know, do we get to a point where that is the case? So like how we interact with things changes. And this is kind of why I keep having this hypotheses that as an Amazon seller, a lot's about to change because these things are coming. How fast they're coming is hard to kind of put your finger on because it is exponentially growing and changing. Models that are getting released right now, they're getting dramatically cheaper, open source, like adding new capabilities. There's rumors that the models that are readily available now are actually like 5 years old, right? So you're like, cool, like actually where the tech truly is, just not widely available, is maybe 2-3 generations down the line. We're just waiting for society to get to a point where we can actually like utilize that in a way that makes sense. And so it does make you kind of pause and think, especially as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, and just be like, well, how does this change everything we do? How does this change design? How does this change engineering? How does this change how we communicate and support our users?
Right.
How does this change how we do marketing even? I mean, it touches everything. And that's so dumbfounding to me. And I think as an Amazon seller, you need to be able to pause and say, well, out of all the things I currently do, what can I automate using things like Zapier, which has been around forever? And or what can I apply AI to? Or what's being built right now that's on the horizon the next 12, 18 months that I need to start kind of wrapping my head around so that when it becomes available, you're early in utilizing, understanding these technologies that do become a technical competitive advantage, right? Like if Maven, if repricing as a whole concept was only available to highly technical people, those people would have a competitive advantage over every other seller who didn't have access to that technology.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when things become available is interesting. There's a quote, I forget who it's attributed by. I think it's Arthur C. Clarke, but it's basically like the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed, meaning the people building the thing have access to it because they're building it and it's not cost effective yet, blah, blah, blah. But eventually it becomes cost effective, accessible, all these things. And so can you be at the forefront of that? And being at the forefront, funny enough, is like literally just joining betas of new tools that are on the horizon. Just be like, I just want to provide like feedback and value. You get access to, like, I did this with a company called Lindy. They had like this super long wait list, and I just kept hounding them. I was like, I want in. Like, I will annoy you until eventually you're like, yeah, all right, dude, you can come test it, right? And it's like, cool, like now I'm in. And it didn't cost anything because they're in beta, but
Right.
you know, how can you be at the cutting edge? And I think a lot of Amazon sellers view this as like just a straight business, but there's so much innovation that's happening here that if you're a curious, ambitious person, you can approach things fundamentally different. Like if you were to build an AI first Amazon selling business, what does that look like? I don't know. Good question, right? We were talking about questions at the beginning of this conversation, right? Finding the good questions, and the right questions, good questions come from curiosity and just chasing that, right? So there's a lot there. I think it's very exciting. It's also kind of disorienting because things are changing so fast. And for the first time, I would say in our species history, things are changing so fast that we are going to struggle to adapt. And also, like, what does that look like? Nobody has an answer. I love the articles like, here's what it looks like post AGI. It's like, nobody knows, dude. Like, nobody's experienced this, which is like exciting, but also like, we don't know. We got to figure this out. And so I think kind of getting included into that community, even just as a wallflower, just being like, cool, like how are things changing? What are the conversations that industry is having? And how could that apply to me? You also might find an awesome business opportunity yourself, right? So something to keep in mind. Nice. Keep these questions coming. We got a lot of people joining here. I know we kind of went off a little tangent there, as I like to do. If I can turn it into an AI conversation, Casey, I'm going to. You know that.
Hey, people are interested. It's big right now. We got Maven working. We're maybe going to have other AI strategies in the future. So yeah, it's big. I think I mentioned this a few weeks, months. I don't know. It's blending together a little bit. But I had ChatGPT plan my vacation to San Diego and had a great time. It was perfect. Saved all the time. They were like, here, these are the places you should reach out to, even businesses to get snorkeling stuff from, or
that's awesome.
Yeah, snorkeling, not scuba. But yeah, it's just available, and it's just about changing your habits to actually take advantage of it instead of defaulting to your manual process of whatever that may be.
Yeah. So like now my go-to default new tab page is not google.com, it's perplexity.com. Right. So like I rarely use Google because I have to like search my thing, click through all the links, try to find the answer. Now with Perplexity, I ask the direct question and it does all that link tracking stuff for me. It comes back just like, here's the answer. Here's where I found it if you want to go directly to the source. So it's crazy, right? But if you think about how much of our time goes towards just trying to find answers to very simple questions because it's not very efficient as a whole species, and then you remove that inefficiency, imagine what that does for productivity. I mean, it is. I mean, we were doing it the other day. I was doing a lunch and learn with you guys. I was like, how do I share my computer audio via Zoom while I'm screen sharing? I literally just asked that Perplexity live. It was like, go to this setting and turn that on. I was like, oh, cool. There we go. Like, it would have taken like 5 to 10 minutes last time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but listen, it adds up, right?
Yeah.
So I am curious, everybody. We got a lot of people on the call right now. I am curious in the comments what you think about AI as a whole, maybe on a macro level. How do you think that could be applicable as a seller? Are you thinking about this right now? Is this a question in your mind? I would love to hear more dialogue from more sellers about this, because the sellers I do talk to are like, yeah, it's really blowing me away right now, and I'm not sure how to feel about it. But I'm curious to see how everybody else feels too. Definitely a lot there.
If you're using it in certain areas, if you're hoping that it's available in different areas, hopefully you're already using it on Maven. But if not, where are you using it elsewhere? Yeah, I'd be curious to see how folks are kind of weaving that in rather.
Exactly. Yeah, love it.
I know earlier we mentioned seasonality. This would be a good time to start looking at beach things. Everyone's going to start thinking about summertime soon and want to get ahead of the July rush. So any July 4th stuff, things like that. Might be a good time to start looking at those types of items.
Yeah, seasonality is always a fun thing. I never really experienced it with OARA stuff, but the wholesale for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a cool guy. Just activated my subscription, and I noticed a difference already. I have half on Maven strategy and the other half on Chase the Buy Box. The Amazon fees in the calculation for cost, etc. Is it accurate? Yes.
Yeah,
it can. There are some exceptions where we've talked about this on previous lives, where sometimes the data in the API is not necessarily correct, but that's what we have to go upon. So if you notice one that is inaccurate, please let our support team know so we can jump in and create a ticket with Seller Central and just be like, hey, like that's incorrect. Please get that fixed. Definitely something we want to be aware of, but it kind of happens. But Casey, you had a comment there.
Yeah, I was going to kind of just build off of what you just said. Like Dylan mentioned, we pull directly from Amazon's API. So that's what they're giving us for those fees. There was an instance about a month ago, there was a fee change on a specific category of product, and Amazon's own fee calculator wasn't calculating those fees properly based on what was being sent to us via the API. So if you're using different calculators, trust that the fees are accurate. But what I would say is if you see when a sale is officially processed and those fees are different than the fees that are shown within Aura, that would be a good time to reach out to us. That's going to be obviously when the sale's completed, processed, everything's kind of finalized. If those final numbers don't match up, definitely shoot us a note. We'll make sure that we make the proper adjustments there.
Yeah. That's the fun part about what we do. There's when you say the price, I'm like, yes, but that's kind of reflected in 4 different systems, and each one could be slightly different, which is definitely tough. See, guys, great question here. Can you sort the listings by age on the listing page? Casey, you want to hit that?
Yeah, so if you scroll to the right on the listings page, there'll be a few different buckets of age of inventory. I believe it's 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, and there may be a couple additional ones. You'll be able to go and sort by that, but there is also going to be a breakdown for each specific listing that will show you. You have 10 listings that are 0 to 30, 15 that are 30 to 60. So you'll kind of see a breakdown there, but you can click at the top there and it'll sort by that specific bucket rather.
Yeah.
So you can kind of go through those and prioritize, maybe liquidate some things depending on what you're looking at there.
Yeah. Let's see, Annie, could you summarize those 2 strategies, Maven versus Chase the Buy Box, for the greenies in the room? For sure. So Maven is our AI-based model. So it's basically handling far more complexity, so far more scenarios than a rule-based ever could. And it abstracts a lot of that away from you, meaning most of your rule-based strategies have anywhere from 15 to 30 settings for each one, which is like kind of cumbersome and relies on you, the seller, to set those correctly and hope you did right. Maven actually only has 1. There's a few additional configurations, but there's really only 1 setting. How do you want to set your min values, right? ROI, what have you. So we're able to take a lot of that complexity away and just kind of be like, we got this, right? Like if you think about like the complexities of driving a car, there's actually a lot to pay attention to, a lot of moving parts. But with like Tesla's full self-driving, you just say, do it for me. And it's like, all right, cool, got you covered, right? And then actually, funny enough, this happens to me all the time. It can see more than you can see, right? All the sensors, right? So it can handle far more scenarios than like the human could. So that's Maven. And basically, Maven is designed to find the balance between sales velocity and profitability. That's an actual value. We call that the optimal price. And that changes, by the way, in a lot of cases, moment by moment, just like your auto max value can change moment by moment. So what we do is we say, okay, cool. We know where we want to go, that optimal price. We want you and the buy box value there. We'll study your competition to understand what's true, how are they going to react, what's their behaviors. And then based on what's true now, where we want to go, we deploy certain behaviors to essentially close that gap as often as we can. So that's Maven. Casey, you want to hit the chase the buy box strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of a little bit different than Maven. Obviously, Maven's looking for what it considers to be that optimal price, sales speed, and margin. But Maven's not specifically designed to just target the buy box and get you in the buy box. That's what the buy box targeting strategy is going to do. It's going to focus on whoever that buy box winner is. That's going to be the price that it's attacking. Typically, we recommend pricing a penny, 2 pennies below them, just to try and edge them out by a small portion, maximize your margin, still hopefully get you in the buy box. But then you can also take advantage of the maintenance setting, which I typically recommend having set it as raise price by 2 cents. So that means when you win the buy box, Aura is then going to assess the other competitors, try and find what it determines to be the next most likely buy box winning offer, and adjust you to be 2 pennies below that person. So still beating them for the buy box, but maximizing that margin. And you can adjust the rules-based strategy of chasing the buy box. So unlike Maven, it is more configurable. You can have it match the buy box price. You can undercut the buy box by 5 cents, 50 cents, a percentage. And you can also have it priced differently depending on who's in the buy box, whether it's an FBA or an FBM listing, if it's a prime seller, and kind of all those nuances. So that'll be broken down in the pursuit section of that setting. But if you are in your dashboard and you go to build a buy box targeting strategy, the settings that are already in that strategy are our best recommendations. So you can feel free to look at them. If everything looks good, you can feel free to set those min and maxes and fire that up. If you want to adjust a couple things, also feel free to do that there.
Yeah. So the way I think about this is like default to Maven is going to handle far more for you and require a lot less from you. But there are situations where you need a very specific type of functionality, in which case you would fall back on rule-based or custom strategies. So, we were talking at the beginning of the conversation about like the oscillation strategy covering, a decent percentage of your listings. Maven's going to be able to handle far more of those. It's kind of how I like to think about it. See, John, I use Channel Max, Profit Protector Pro, Be Cool, SellerSnap, and Inform.go. In all honesty, Aura 1.0 has outperformed them all for me. So happy. Love hearing that. That's fantastic. Hopefully you're doing a lot less work in the account and getting better performance, which is kind of the whole goal here, right? Again, technical leverage, right? How do we give you sellers functionality, give you technology that requires a lot less from you and gives you better performance? A lot of times what ends up happening is kind of the inverse. It's like, here's, 15 new settings in your strategy. Like, great. I don't understand how any of that works. And you just broke it. So thank you for that. Like if you have to hire a VA to manage your repricing tool, that's probably a problem. So happy to hear that you've tried and surveyed a lot of these, John. And we've been able to outperform. That's fantastic to hear. See, The World or Nothing. Love that name, by the way. Is this a podcast now? It's not. It's open office hours. So every Wednesday between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. EST. See, I'm running out of juice at this point. I need more tea. Every Wednesday between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. EST, we join everyone live. And it's kind of like when you're in college and your professor is just like, hey, I'm just always in my office between this hour. Come with the questions you have. It's open-ended. That's exactly what this is designed to be. We want to be able to have this level of communication where you can just ask crazy questions. You can definitely do this in support in real time. We always urge, hey, don't wait until office hours to ask questions. Like, get them answered immediately via our support team, Casey and Finn. But if you want us to jump in and kind of go a little bit more high level, we can do that. If you're like, hey, how do I solve this one problem? Or, hey, I'm trying to transition from RA to wholesale. How in the world do I even begin to try to think that through? Or who's the right person to go learn this specific thing from? We have a lot of that. We've been in the industry for, I don't know, a little over a decade at this point, either as sellers or on the software side. So yeah, not a podcast necessarily, although I think sometimes we riff pretty well. So I can definitely see that vibe coming through.
And we do post these recordings. I believe it's on the office hours page, or it might be at a different page. Yeah, the office hours page. So if you do miss one, you want to go back and see if there's anything good, definitely feel free to check it out. Maybe watch it in time and a half to cut over us riffing and getting to the actual questions. But yeah, they are available post live session as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if you go to goaura.com/office hours, office hours is all one word put together. If you scroll down to the bottom there, you'll actually see all the past recordings. So you can watch all the replays, which are immediately available. So if you missed anything, you came in halfway through, you're like, oh, I wonder what they covered in the first half. It's immediately available when we stop this recording. So you're good to go there. I do miss running the podcast, Wholesale Made Easy. We had this podcast 5 years ago, I think. Probably the first I'm not going to say the only, because Corey Gainham came out with an awesome wholesale-based podcast, but we were one of the first ones to come out with a specifically tailored wholesale-based podcast. And so it's called Wholesale Made Easy. It's still available. Actually, if you go to VinDriveCRM.com/podcast, you'll see it there. It's on, iTunes, all that good stuff too. I think we did 54, 55 episodes, and it was designed to be evergreen content, meaning it's still applicable today as it was 5 years ago. So not a lot of technical or tactical things that are only applicable. Like, here's how you do this now, or here's how you overcome these fees now. It's really, let's take this down to the foundations here and build from there. And then all the tactics change, right? They're always going to change. But the foundations of what wholesale is really hasn't changed that much. There are certainly some things, but at the end of the day, like understanding it's relationship-based versus transactional-based, that alone can really help you understand how to transition from RA, which is very transactional based, to wholesale, which is based on relationships, and understanding that wholesale really is the skill set of sales. That alone will change the game for a lot of sellers. So highly recommend going to give it a listen to. We still have tons of downloads that happen every single day, which is still dumbfounding to me, considering we haven't touched it in a while. But, we got to a point where I'm like, we've covered everything and then some. That's it. We're good here. There's no sense in just kind of going on with that, because I felt like, we're going to have to start diving into like these small little tactic things. And it was like, if that's where we're at, we've covered everything. Let's end it here. This is designed to be an evergreen thing. But yeah, definitely give it a listen.
Yeah, I don't want to run into the Lost problem. The show Lost, they only had 3 seasons written, and then the show was too popular. They had to keep writing. They didn't know what they were writing about.
Yeah. It's like, where are we going with this, right? It's funny, when we were in Miami at the Miami Seller Conference, I had a lot of people that were doing wholesale. Like, yeah, I listened to that all the time. I was like, what? That's crazy. It's like something years old, but that's awesome. That's what it was designed to do. But it's awesome to hear that, the reason why or how it was designed is actually coming across and being used in that way. So that's been fantastic. But love the idea of possibly starting another podcast. They're a lot of work, funny enough. We could definitely do it, but definitely a lot of work when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I prefer this format. We get to chat with folks. We get more back and forth.
Yeah, I get to talk about AI and not get in trouble. So we have a handful of minutes here before we start to wrap up. So keep those questions coming. We definitely have a little bit more time to dive deeper into a few different topics as they come through. So definitely keep those questions and comments coming through. And again, we love seeing things like what John had here to say. So if you're recently jumping into Aura, or joining us for lives for the first time, we'd love to get some feedback from you guys as well. Annie, lives are great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Lives are fun. It was a random idea we had, and we're like, let's just give it a shot. And it's been growing every single week. We track all the data. We talk about data, right? We track all the data, make sure we're trending in the right direction here. And luckily that has been the case. So thank you everyone for joining us. I know we have a lot of people that join every single week, which is phenomenal. So we appreciate you guys making the time to do that. We got a lot of cool stuff coming y'all's way. A lot of stuff happening in the background, which is super exciting. Some users are already in the know about it. Some are not. I'll leave it there for stealth mode purposes. Nice. So we'll give it a little bit more time here, and then we'll start to wrap up. One thing I'm very excited about, I know we talk about this a lot, is the conferences, right? Like actually getting in person, like having real face-to-face conversations, not only with our users, but potential users, is just phenomenal. It's been such a great experience at when we did this in Miami. We'll be sponsoring the Proven Conference in May in Orlando. So I believe it's the later half of May. We'll be sponsors there. So there'll be 2 or 3 of us in attendance on the team. I'll definitely be there. So if you're going, let us know in the comments. We definitely want to hang out and say hello. If not, you should go. I think it's going to be awesome. From what I'm gathering, it's going to be a massive group. I anticipate roughly 1,000+ people going. I don't know. It's going to be insane. I lost my voice just with 200 people at a conference. So we'll see how this goes. It's definitely going to be more tough.
Yeah. Stock up on the tea and lozenges ahead of time.
I know. I'm literally going to have to like do all this. I can't do it in real time. I'm like the whole like week or two prior, I'm going to have to just get ready, you know? It's going to be crazy. I'm not sure how people prepare for those things. Just yell throughout the day. I don't know, but get my vocal cords
Voice
trained
exercises. Do a little Anchorman warm up there.
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to start doing that and stand up with the team.
Yeah.
We'll do a Anchorman warm up session with everyone.
Ow now, brown cow.
Yeah, how down, brown cow. Exactly. Nice, cool. So I think we're coming up here on time. So we're gonna go ahead and end this session. Again, we do this every week, right? So every Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. EST. It's an open format. So there's, we'll typically start with some kind of topic, something that's top of mind for us, just to kind of get the juices flowing, get the ball rolling. But then it's really up to you, the viewers. What do you want to hear? What questions do you have? Let's dive deeper into all these different things. Again, there's no set format necessarily, just how can we provide as much value as we can in this hour-long session. If you haven't, please give us a try. You'll definitely talk with Casey if you have any questions. And if you're already using Aura and you've talked to support, you've already met Casey, which is fantastic. But yeah, we just wanted to say thank you for everyone for making the time to come join us here. And we'll definitely see you guys next week.
Yeah. And if you have any ideas for topics for us to kick off the call with, definitely feel free to come in and chat with me real quick. Say, hey, this has been top of mind. Would love for you guys to just spin your wheels on it for the first 10 minutes. Feel free to shoot us a note in chat. We're always happy to take suggestions and focus on things that are top of mind for you folks as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.
All right, everybody.